Thou shalt not circumcise, the hidden meaning of the Second Commandment. Agoravox published the text of this lecture in France in 2021. The exegetic finding that was its motive was the subject of a publication by the British Medical Journal in 2007 and in 2008 of a lecture at the 8th International Symposium of NoCirc in the School of Law of Keele University, United Kingdom. Professor Romer, the tenant of the chair Biblical Circles in the Collège de France, the highest French academic institution, commented it in 2010. You are right to assert that Genesis 17 displays another view of circumcision than Genesis 15 or the book of Deuteronomy. The lay writers were seemingly less interested in that practice and even opposed to it. The expression circumcision of the heart might even contain a polemic stance against circumcision of the flesh. 12 years later, two new exegetic findings confirmed it. See chapters 2 and 4 of my little book, The Birth of Judaism, Between Exegesis and Archaeology, available at Amazon. The great proof of the identity of Abraham and Akhenaten, the Second Commandment resumes word for word Akhenaten's religious revolution in Egypt. Monotheism, banning idols, images, and sexual mutilation. Feminine and masculine sexual mutilation, the greatest crime against humanity. That is very true, said Alain de Mijola, psychoanalyst. If Moses was an Egyptian, if he transmitted his religion to the Jews, it was that of Akhenaten, Sigmund Freud. Moses was a saint man, deeply religious like Akhenaten. He carved the ideas of the latter into the stone of the 10 Commandments. Like Akhenaten, he was a pacifist. He preferred walking in the desert for 40 years to invading Palestine and wrote, "Our journey had lasted 30 years. At that time, the whole warlike generation had disappeared." Deuteronomy 2:14. The one who has crushed or mutilated genitals will not be admitted in the assembly of the Lord. Deuteronomy chapter 23, 2. It was the generation of the polytheist circumcised. Those verses show that Moses particularly hated circumcision because of its psychosociological outcomes. Educated by the coup against Akhenaten, related by Genesis 15, and the worshipping of the golden calf, he doesn't trust the circumcised and refuses the right to take part in assemblies to them. Rumor has it, the law of Moses would include circumcision. Some apocryphal verses of the books of Exodus and Leviticus found it. The Gospels, the Book of the Mormons, and Freud in the first 2 chapters of Moses and monotheism peddle it. Nevertheless, the contrary is a historical fact. See Joshua 5:2-9. The recall of the forced circumcision of his son. see Exodus 4:24-26, was keenly present in the mind of the author of the Ten Commandments. A humiliated father, wounded in the flesh of his flesh and his dignity, solemnly pronounced the first historic declaration of human duties and rights, of universal value, the basis of elementary ethics and legal systems of all democracies, in front of the people. The fourth covenant respects the human body. Do not commit homicide. We are going to see that the Second Commandment, Exodus 20:3-6, abolishes the submission of the human person by the terror of the commandment imposed on Abraham. That commandment is the archaeological and biblical proof that Moses was a follower of Akhenaten. Indeed, like him, it begins with forbidding polytheism and its cult of idols and images. You shall have no other God than I. You shall not make yourself idols or whatever image of what is above in the sky or down on the earth, or in the waters under the earth. Exodus 20:3-4. That prescription spreads to the idolatry of the phallus and its complement, sexual mutilation. The expression of a cult of the male phallus, joined to the destruction of the feminine one, it modifies, down on the earth, the image of the human body. Verse 5 goes much further. You will not bow down in front of them. You will not adore them, for I, the Eternal, your God, I am a jealous God, who prosecute the crime of fathers upon children up to the third and fourth generations. The conjunction for is crucial. It indicates that the crime of fathers upon children violates the ban of idols and images that has just been told. In Egyptian culture, which the Hebrews had just left, the crime of fathers upon their children that modifies the image of what is down on the earth, and which God affirms being jealous of, can only be sexual mutilation. Thinking that there could not be any doubt about its meaning, Moses uses that periphrasis to emphasize that sexual mutilation is a crime. The God of Moses is not only jealous of other gods and their representations, he is also jealous of all alteration of the human body that he created. He forbids the human sacrifice perpetrated upon the body of children, a bloody homage to polytheism and the archaic, telluric divinities of fertility and procreation. The book of Deuteronomy does not order circumcision. It confirms, observe everything I laid down for you, without adding anything to it. 13:1. But the religious back up on Exodus 34, the apocryphal character of which is obvious since it rewrites verse 25, denaturing it, to disregard both the order of terms and the accurate wording, the crime of fathers upon children. They interpret it as if it said, who persecute upon children either the crime of the father or the crimes of fathers, and thus condemn common criminality. That is inexact and absurd. Firstly, because if the sentence had that meaning, it would have one of those two wordings. Secondly, the sixth commandment, do not commit homicide, already condemns ordinary crime. Thirdly, one does not punish children of criminals. It would be aberrant that a divine command would institute familial responsibility. It would give the word jealous the immoderate meaning of suspicious enough to be unjust. Only paranoid conservatives may have defied such an idea, challenged by Ezekiel. The son will not bear the fault of the father, nor the father the fault of the son. Ezekiel 18:20. Fourthly, rabbis ignore verse 20-22 a little further, which affirms that iron desecrates even stone. If you build a stone altar for me, do not build it with carved stones, for by touching them with the iron, you made them lay. Iron would profane stone, but not the human body? Moses says, in an imaged way, that the excision of the foreskin is a profanation, a blasphemy against the work of the Creator. Denuding the glands is the barbarity of Egyptian polytheists. Finally, several implausibilities of the Orthodox interpretation suggest that it is inexact. The second commandment comes right after the first because it illustrates it. A mass pedosexual criminality offends God in a particularly reprehensible way. Stigmatizing sexual mutilation as crime against creation, the second commandment punishes it without limitation, looking for the culprits in all surviving generations. The third and the fourth are very plainly grandfathers and great-grandfathers. It is unclear whether God, furious enough with common criminality to punish children of criminals, would precisely stop at the fourth descending generation. But the other way round, the punishment naturally stops at great-grandfathers. To repress the greatest and most trivialized crime against humanity, the legislator of genius invented the notion of non-applicability of statutory limitations 3 millennia before Nuremberg. God can only be jealous of His creation. Man may not alter it without usurping His place. You shall have no other God than I implies. You shall not set yourself up as God without altering my creation. God does not discriminate against the sexes. He cannot have excluded women by requiring a sign of covenant from men only. Abraham also circumcised Ishmael, and circumcision does not give the Jews more right on Canaan than the Arabs. Finally, through abolishing sexual mutilation, Moses tolls the death knell for the terrible sanction of lack of circumcision, exclusion. Affiliations founded on a particular sign had instituted discrimination and segregation amongst the elected. Circumcision of the heart replaces it. That beam of corroborating mistakes, carelessness, and lies hides the right interpretation to conceal the condemnation of sexual mutilation by Moses. The second commandment should have been, "You shall not circumcise." Its intellectual falsification would have been impossible. The circumlocution, the crime of fathers upon children, enabled the supporters and victims of circumcision to distort it by a sacrilegious interpretation. To restore circumcision, its followers pulled the text into an incredible misinterpretation. They introduced an unlikely double meaning to hide that crime was sexual mutilation. But when dictating his commandments, the Eternal does not play with double meanings, especially since, here on the Sinai, the historical context is the abandonment of sexual mutilation for 40 years. But if proponents of circumcision dared to falsify the meaning of the second commandment for boys, they gave up the monstrous and often deadly excision of Hebrew girls. God changed his mind between the covenant with Abraham and that with Moses. It was not the same God. The fourth covenant abolished the law imposed on Abraham because the law may not speak against life. On the one hand, the foreskin is the property of the human person, and a child is a human person. On the other hand, it is a sexual organ, and circumcision is mutilation. For 3 reasons. Skin is an organ. The foreskin is not dead skin. It is not a fold of skin, but a double-layered organ. Skin outside, mucosa inside, which makes it a lip, particularly erogenous. Without that lip, the mucosa of the glands keratinizes, becomes skin, and loses some of its sensitivity. One makes love mucosa against mucosa, for the greatest pleasure of both partners. Spouses of circumcised often complain about the irritation provoked by callous glands. Against the covenant by submission of Genesis 17, the liberator of the Hebrews established the covenant between equals of the great, authentic, and universal Judaism, which abolished sexual mutilation. The Decalogue is the first historical declaration of human duties and rights. The second and sixth commandment decree the first, inalienable and sacred of those rights, the right to the body. The fact that the second commandment transcribes Akhenaten's reforms is the great disclosure of the birth of Judaism between exegesis and archaeology, my little book. Akhenaten and Moses rebelled against the alliance of fathers and grandfathers against children. We end with the myth of circumcision in the law of Moses. According to Freud and a few others, he would have been murdered, likely because he did not want to invade Palestine. Moses, Jesus, Rabbin, fanatic Jews assassinate the pacifist leaders.